So good afternoon. I've been told that I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, so it's a hard position to be in. As Kim mentioned, I'm the director of the Sustainable Agriculture Network. We are an international coalition of nonprofits working in agriculture. And what I want to talk to you today is about trends in sustainable sourcing and also about our journey of being deeply involved with certification agriculture for 2 decades and then deciding to completely change our line of work in 2017. So inertia is a very powerful force. So you start down the road, inertia takes over, and you don't really stop to reassess things, right? And that's why the subscription business model is so popular. Who hasn't had a gym membership or a magazine subscription or something similar that you kept for way too long just because continuity was automatic and stopping required an act of will? In our case, we had been working with certification for over 20 years in partnership with Rainforest Alliance. They took care of the logo that went on certified products. Coffee was a big part of that. And we did, and they also did the market development, and we did the standards that were applied to farms, and also the technical systems and documents that underpin the system. And while we had some growing reservations about the limits of certification as a tool, we kept trying to work with it. But things happen in life sometimes that make you stop and rethink the direction that you're going. I bet many of you know people in your lives, or even yourselves, that you have faced a major event or a scare that made you stop and rethink your diet, your exercise habits, smoking, or something else. For us, the discussions that we had with UTS and Rainforest Alliance in late 2016 about merging the systems were our big event that made us stop and rethink the path that we were going on. We quickly realized that the merger while it made a lot of sense, it didn't really work for us. It was not going to work for us as a network of nonprofit organizations. So we stepped out of it, and we had to decide, do we create a new certification system, or replacing the things that were under the responsibility of Rainforest Alliance, or do we do something different? And our first thought was, well, let's just create a new certification system. We have all the technical components. We know how this works. We have some connections to the market. That's what we should do. But after some soul searching, thinking about the results that we have achieved with certification and some of the limitations, we decided to actually get out of that space and hand over to Rainforest Alliance our tools and systems and award them a license to our intellectual property. And the key reason behind that decision was that we believe that we can achieve more impact by developing alternative and complementary tools to work with the bulk of farmers that are outside of certification. We had worked with certification for many years. We knew the positive impacts that it can bring, but we also were keenly aware that it was not always the best solution for all farmers. Certification standards are developed using multi-stakeholder standard processes. And while those bring a high degree of legitimacy to these standards, they also contribute to make these standards quite comprehensive and complex. And in practice, that can put them out of reach for many producers in any given sector. And speaking about producers, if you look at audit costs and certification fees, certification can become a costly exercise. And there's also the question of what value is it bringing for producers. Certification works by pointing out what is not working well, what's wrong, but it doesn't really help you solving those things. So there's a question of added value there. And those two things represent a challenge in terms of scalability, or how many farmers you can reach. Now, if you consider that the distribution of farmers according to their social, environmental, and production performance follows a bell-shaped curve, where you have on the X, you have the sustainability performance, on the Y, you have the number of producers. So you have a few producers that are really, really good, a few producers that are really, really bad, and a lot of people in the middle. Certification as a tool usually comes at the top end of that curve, right? And is a tool that is effective in engaging people that are at that position or close to it. So the gap is not that big, and they can do the investments and get there and get certified and make use of the benefits that certification can bring. Now, what that means is that there's a big need out there. There's a large number of producers that are not close to getting to that space yet, or cannot make use of the benefits that certification could bring. And our theory, when we were working with certification, our theory was, well, we're going to work with the top performers, and we're going to pull this whole curve upward. So we're going to bring everybody up. And I'm not sure that's what happened. And possibly what's happening is that as standards get revised and updated and tightened, what you may be seeing is actually a widening of the gap between the top performers and the rest of the field. Now, this is also a model that works in a low-hanging fruit type of way, and where you have some growth, and then after that growth, it becomes every subsequent increase in uptake becomes more difficult than the previous one. So let's look at what's happening in the market. This is a graph from a publication called The State of Sustainable Markets that was launched last year. And if you like sustainability in agriculture, I would really recommend it. It's very long, a few hundred pages, a lot of information on sustainability in agriculture. I really recommend it if you're interested in the topic. And surprise, as it was mentioned today, for economics, we also don't have great statistics in certification. So you have three curves there, and what it represents is that we don't have good information on farms that have multiple certifications. So the top curve represents the average production in cocoa, where you would have very little overlap between the farms. The middle one is an average one, and the bottom one is where you'd have a lot of overlap between the farms. So farms with multiple certificates. But what we see there is a scenario where you have some starts slow and it grows, and then it kind of starts tapering off. And this is cocoa, which is a sector that has had a lot of investment in certification over the last 10, 15 years. And for coffee, which is also a sector that has had a lot of investment in this, is also a similar curve. It kind of starts slow, and then it grows, and then it kind of starts tapering off and growing. So this fits with that idea of a model of a low-hanging fruit. And unless something there's a fundamental change in the way these systems operate, and this includes many different certifications, includes, in the case of coffee, 4C, Foods for Forest Alliance, Fair Trade, Organic, so this is very comprehensive. You would have to tease that out to break if you wanted to know by systems. But the overall hypothesis is that we expect that this will remain a kind of a slow growth unless there's some fundamental change in the way it works. Now, the success of certification, in a way, there has been decent penetration. So if you look at the graph of cocoa, we're talking about roughly 30% of global production. If you look at coffee, we're probably talking about 45% of global production. If you take 4C away from that, 4C is the bulk of the volume, you probably go to around 20%. And it's still significant, it's still representative, it's still great news for sustainability. Now, that's after many years. When I'm talking to other sectors that are just starting to think about sustainability, they're actually trying to think in different ways because they recognize the time that it takes for this uptake as well. So I was recently talking to a major tire company who's one of the largest buyers of natural rubber in the world. And what their head of sustainability was telling me was, you know what, I cannot wait 20 years to get 20% of my supply certified. So he said, I need quicker and cheaper solutions that allow me to invest more of my resources in supporting farmers to improve. Does that mean that certification no longer has value? Not at all. Certification is still a valuable tool, but as with any other tool, it has its limitations, and we need other tools. I think that's part of the key message. We need a multiplicity of different approaches. That fits well with another trend that we're seeing, which is single issue sustainability, which is single issue or a narrowly defined set of issues in sustainability. So you see that in companies making commitments to no deforestation, or to tackling child labor, or to addressing modern slavery, although that is there's a different driver for that. There's regulation is a big driver for that. But you see these more single issue approaches. And we're also seeing that in groups like the Consumer Goods Forum. So who doesn't know, for those who doesn't know, the Consumer Goods Forum is a network of retailers, manufacturers, and service providers. And combined, they have a total annual sales of $3.5 trillion. So this is huge. And they decide that on sustainability, they're going to commit to just a very small number of things. They're going to work in deforestation, they're going to work in forced labor, food waste, and refrigeration. And that's their big focus on sustainability. So that's their pushing that. So we're seeing that focus on fewer issues. Another trend that we're seeing is companies moving to develop their own sustainability initiatives, so company-owned programs. And that generally is driven by our perception about added value, about engaging with your producers and with your suppliers, and about looking for different or more impact on the ground. One of my favorite cases in this space of company-owned systems is that of Mondelez. Mondelez is a global snacks company. They are the owner of iconic brands such as Oreos and Milka and Trident. And they're actually pretty big in chocolate. Chocolate is one of their main businesses. They're the #2 company globally in chocolate. And they were looking at the future of cocoa farming. And they realized that the younger generations of farmers, or the sons of farmers, no longer wanted to be cocoa farmers. They did not want to farm cocoa trees. Cocoa farming is hard work, and income is challenging. The cocoa farmers would look at the coffee farmer and say, look, those guys have it good. That gives you an idea how challenging cocoa is in terms of income. And Mondelez realized that this is a huge threat for the future of their business. There are no farmers, no cocoa, no chocolate, right? So they decided to do their own sustainability program called Cocoa Life. It's focused on 5 areas of impact. So it's focused on farming, livelihoods, youth, community, and environment. And each area has 2 KPIs only. So we're talking about 10 KPIs. It's a very focused program. And so far, the program's been running for a few years now. They just launched the latest sustainability report. Also, if you're interested, recommend looking at that as a good example. And they have trained almost 90,000 farmers in good agricultural practices. The fascinating thing is that they focus not only on the farm, but also on the community surrounding. So they also help establish village savings and loan associations where most of the members are women. They supported the establishment of community action plans and distributed close to 6 million seedlings of higher productivity cocoa trees to farmers, among many different things. So they went from this buyer demanding compliance with something to a partner that is engaged in supporting change, which is a fascinating change in their perspective. Another case is that of a major roaster that is relying on different certification schemes for 15% of their supply, usually for their premium coffee categories. And that makes a lot of sense. Those certifications work really well in that space for them. But the question they had was, what do I do with the other 85%? Just extending those certifications didn't make sense for them. In terms of cost and speed of uptake, they couldn't do it. So they said, we need an alternative. So what they did was they identified their 2 most important areas of supply, chose one of them, and started engaging with the farmers and the farmers' organizations in those areas. And together with the farmers, they defined, okay, what are the priorities in sustainability for farming in this area? And they came out with soil, water, and climate as the 3 big priorities. And the interesting thing was that there was 2 primarily defined by the farmers and 1 by the buyer. And they're now building a program and trying to engage other people to support this program to work in these 3 areas. So again, a different approach trying to get to bigger scale. Another topic that I think is worth mentioning is the influence on sustainability on consumer behavior. There's been a lot of research on this topic, and it's a fascinating field. And I want to do a small research with you guys here. So who in the audience buys 2/3 of their groceries from ethical or sustainable sources? Just raise your hands. So this is actually pretty good. A few hands came up, but actually more than what I usually get. But this gives you an indication of the challenge that we have. You are a very, very well-informed audience. Sustainability is part of your work. And even then we have I don't know, maybe 15, 20% of the room raise their hand. So it's a huge challenge to think about consumers in sustainability. In research that I have been involved in the past, we found out that most consumers want to buy sustainable products, which is great news, right? But then the drawback was that it couldn't cost more, it had to be available when and how they wanted, and there could be no trade-off in quality. Really challenging. There's other research that is showing that sustainability is just another element that composes the desirability of a product, and not a very strong one at that. There's one of my favorite studies on this is one that is entitled, "Sweatshop Labor is Wrong Unless the Shoes Are Cute." And what that study found out was that consumers are actually pretty good in rationalizing their less sustainable choices to justify their purchases to themselves. And the funny thing was that that was not permissible to their friends. So it was okay when they did it, but when their friends did it, there was no shame on you for doing that. Other research is showing the influence of willful ignorance. And the finding there was that more consumers that are more ethically aware or are more aware of ethical issues, they can avoid seeking information on sustainability that will cause them negative emotion. So you actively not seek information. You don't want to know about it because you know you'll get conflicted. And I can definitely relate to that. There have been times in my life where I don't really want to know where this fish is coming from. Otherwise, I'm not going to eat it for lunch, or I don't want to. So it's fascinating, these studies. So realistically, we're looking at consumers, and we believe that they're not going to be a huge influence, a huge driver of sustainability, at least in the short term. Maybe long term that will change, but in the short term, it's going to remain a challenge. So where does all of this leave us in terms of sustainability? As an American author from the early 20th century said, every complex problem has an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And that's just it. Sustainability is complex. There's no single solution that is going to work for you. You have to look at your supply chain and decide what makes more sense, what solutions work best in your supply chain, and maybe different solutions if you're having different supply chains in different regions. Certification is still a valuable tool, still makes a lot of sense in some cases. Company-owned programs are gaining traction and make a lot of sense as well. They can be structured as internal verification systems, or they can be structured more as partnership models where companies are working with their suppliers and producers. Now, in order to deliver change at scale, what we believe is necessary are four things. We need to do a better job of understanding complementarity and context in the use of these tools or solutions. So there's no single tool. We need different tools, different approaches, and they have to be tailored to the local reality. You have to adapt them to your supply chain and the supply chain of your producers. We have to shift our focus to impact. So instead of thinking a lot about compliance, we have to think about impacts. So as a company, it's key that you think about what are the impacts that you want to have in your supply chain, and then design your interventions or adopt your solutions based on those impacts. And measuring impacts is hard, so that's important that you define it at the beginning and not at the end. Focus, as we've seen from these examples of companies that are in the consumer goods forums and others, focus on what is important, what is critical to get right now, and then over time incorporate other things. Doing less, but doing it at depth, across the board, at this point in time, we see it more important than doing a lot. And last, support. We need to rebalance our efforts in sustainability to focus first in supporting farmers to improve, and then add elements of transparency to this work. Supporting farmers to tackle the key challenges that they have in sustainability is where we should be putting most of our effort in. Thank you very much.